I've mentioned in previous videos that I've been diagnosed with ADHD, which has made my school life, work life, and the rest of my life interesting, to say the least. I didn't get diagnosed until about 5 years ago, but have always struggled with the basics. Things like school, or communication, or relationships, hitting deadlines, arriving to places on time, and all that regular stuff. But getting that diagnosis really helped put things into perspective. Now, we all hear the phrase that nowadays everyone has a little bit of ADHD in them from all over the place. But the people who actually have it know how hellish it can be to do a lot of the basic things that we need to do day to day that a lot of other people really take for granted. And considering I and many other people with ADHD have had to work a lot harder to find systems and tools that work for them, hopefully I'm able to impart some of that knowledge to you as well. And while I'm not a therapist or neuroscientist or anything that ends with "ist," I hope that this video can help impart some of that knowledge to you, especially considering I've been asked lately how I cope with my ADHD and work in the game audio world and kind of finagle my life so that it works for me. So don't take this as gospel or medical advice. Everyone's ADHD manifests differently from one another. Consider this a menu of things that you can try out. Some of this may work fantastically for you, and some of it may not work at all. See what interests you and try it out. Now, the first thing I want to mention is the idea of systems. These are basically tools or techniques that are in our lives that help us create or do things day to day. Using a calendar app or a reminders app can be a system in and of itself. It can be simple or very, very complicated, depending on what we're trying to do. Systems to help us manage our lives are pretty crucial, whether it be working with clients or communicating with people or just living our day-to-day lives. The thing is, people with ADHD tend to need these systems more than anyone else. But we also tend to be the ones who want to ignore the idea of building systems and creating them in our lives. The truth is, many of us, instead of improving or building systems in our lives, tend to blame ourselves for not working harder or getting things done like everyone else seems to be able to. And when we're blaming ourselves over and over, this just gets worse and worse and ends in a downward spiral that just makes us feel totally terrible about everything we're trying to do. So instead of blaming ourselves all the time, it's a better idea instead to blame our systems. Blaming ourselves for not working as hard or doing things that we should be doing doesn't really help anyone, least of all ourselves. But blaming our systems, or lack thereof, can be a much better, much healthier way to go about this. If we can't get stuff done or are just struggling in general, the idea of buckling down and just working harder generally tends to not work. Instead, we can build our systems and improve things from there. Now I want to outline some of the systems that I like to use to help me manage this. The first one I use is a concept called body doubling. This is a fancy term for what's essentially just co-working. One way I like to do this is that I actually use a service called Focus Blocks, where a bunch of strangers get onto a Zoom call together and work in complete silence with one another with their cameras on. None of us are talking during these hour-long blocks, but just knowing that someone is in the background also working on whatever it is they're doing tends to help keep me very, very, very focused. In fact, it's to the point where I can't really work without it nowadays. Just this alone has helped keep me on task more than almost anything else out there. I'll put some resources down below for places that you can do this kind of body doubling setup online. There's tons of services that do that, and feel free to try it out because it's helped me quite a bit. In fact, when I started doing this in about 2021, my income actually doubled in just 1 year from using this because it made me so much more productive. The next one I want to talk about is medication. Again, I'm no doctor, but medication has helped me quite a bit when it comes to managing and coping with my ADHD. I know it's kind of a taboo topic to talk about, and some people will do great on medication, whereas others won't, so you do have to do what's right for you. But for me personally, before I started using medication, I was pretty much exhausted all the time. I was so busy trying to corral my brain that I didn't really have much energy left to do anything at the end of the day, and I ended up not really getting anything done either, so it was the worst of all worlds. So for me personally, it helped me get that base level of energy back and help me use these other systems that I'm going to be mentioning much, much better. But of course, do what's right for you. Now, an incredibly important one is time management. But the thing that people with ADHD need to realize is that the standard advice for time management tends not to work so great. According to the latest research, ADHD brains often have something called time blindness. This means it's hard for people to kind of follow a schedule and kind of stick on task for specific periods of time. Basically, the ADHD brain breaks up time into two categories: now or not now, with no real in between. So to keep me on task a little bit better and keep me kind of on point and able to follow a schedule better, you might have noticed that I have these big red clocks all over my studio, as well as a bunch of little timers as well. These little tools help keep time front and center of my mind. The timers are great because I can physically see time ticking away in my peripheral vision when I set them, and I'm never really trying to race the clock or do something in a specific period of time, but instead just seeing it tick away helps keep me on task and focused for longer, knowing that this time is going away and I don't get too buried in a task. Or conversely, if I'm doing something really boring that I don't want to do, knowing that there's only 10 minutes left makes it easier to push through the end, as opposed to not knowing when this is going to end. And speaking of time, I actually start to batch different tasks on different days. For example, nowadays, Mondays are my meeting day. This means that all of my clients get met with on Monday and not the rest of the week. This means that I have the rest of the week to do my own thing and work and do whatever is most important to me. And I've mentioned in previous videos that even a 5-minute meeting with a client can absolutely ruin the rest of the workday. So this kind of batches it all into one day, and I know that on Mondays I'm not necessarily going to do a lot of direct work with clients, but instead we'll just meet with them. And then the rest of the week I check in on them at 12 p.m. and 3:30 p.m. every day, so they know exactly when I'm going to respond and check my messages, and thus the communication gets a lot better without a lot of meetings. And of course, you've heard this one before, I'm sure, but exercise is a huge one for me. I pretty much work out every day without fail, unless I'm sick or injured, and sometimes twice a day. And on the outside, it might seem like I really enjoy working out, and to an extent I do, especially when it comes to something like judo or jujitsu. But for the most part, if I could get the same results in my life without ever working out, I would totally just sit on the couch all day. But the more I exercise, the more I work out, the more focused I tend to be. It's really that simple. And I can really tell when I kind of slack off and my focus starts to disappear because I haven't been moving. And lastly, I have ways to prevent myself from getting distracted in the first place. I have a few ways that I do this, but one of my favorites is an app on my Mac called Cold Turkey. Basically, this blocks apps or distracting websites or basically anything I don't want to be open at any given time. And even if I try to open, say, my email app or Slack app or anything like that, it just automatically shuts it down for me and doesn't let me open those things. You can even set it up so that even if you restart your computer, it's still going. You cannot break a block once you start it. Even if you try to uninstall it, the blocks will just keep going until the timer runs out. And the equivalent I use on my phone is an app called 1sec. And basically that does the exact same thing, where it blocks distracting apps and distracting websites, so that even if I get the temptation to go to YouTube or do something distracting, it just won't let me and will totally just block it. And lastly, I tend to keep my phone in a cupboard above my microwave too, so I kind of forget it exists, so then I don't get nearly as distracted by it either. Now, something to mention with these sorts of systems and ideas is that if you have ADHD, you have to honor the fact that one day a system that might be working perfectly for you will suddenly just stop working. It's practically guaranteed. You don't know when it'll happen, but you have an idea that one day this thing just isn't going to be working anymore. I'm sure you've dealt with this before. But the thing to remember is to not beat ourselves up about this. We need to be able to honor the fact that sometimes these systems will be working perfectly and then just stop, and then it's time to find something new or try something else out. And our superpower when it comes to ADHD is getting really interested in the most random, cool things. So if there's a system that starts to interest you as one is kind of waning away or just not working anymore, try it out. Just shrug and see if it works for you. Feel free to use that super interest that you probably get from nerding out about certain things that no one else is nerding out about to find interesting systems to implement into your life too. And then if it stops working, just shrug and move on to the next one that interests you. So these are just a few of the systems I use, and there are many other smaller ones, but broadly speaking, these are the ones that work best for me. And remember, for those of us with ADHD, it doesn't really help anyone to blame ourselves for not being perfect and getting things done in the typical way. Instead of blaming ourselves for our shortcomings, all we need to do instead is work on and improve the systems in our lives. No system will be perfect, and we'll always struggle with this, but keep going and never give up. That's all for now. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll talk to you soon. Go pet a dog.